In the past week alone, Marcus Freeman turned down the NFL to return to the Irish, and Notre Dame lost its biggest rivalry. And suddenly, everything about the future feels different. We're covering all that and a whole lot more on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network, all thanks to your support. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame. I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish since 2020. Happy New Year, everybody, and thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, or if you're listening to the podcast, make sure that you're following the show on your preferred platform. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, we have got Greg Flammang from Irish Sports Daily back on the show today, and man, we covered a lot. We'll kick things off by talking about Marcus Freeman's decision to stay at Notre Dame amid NFL interest and how the pressure around this program has shifted heading into 2026. Plus, we'll react to the disappointing end of the Notre Dame USC rivalry and all the shots their side has taken in the aftermath. Then we'll dive into what it means for Notre Dame's independence moving forward. This was a lot of fun for me. I hope you enjoy it as well. Let's do it. All right, I'm joined now by a great friend of the program, Greg Flammang from Irish Sports Daily. And Greg, there are so many different things I want to discuss with you today, but we've got to start with the biggest news of the offseason for Notre Dame. What do you make of Marcus Freeman's decision to return to the Irish for at least 2026 and how he handled the interest from the NFL?
Yeah, it's first of all, Happy New Year to you, Tyler. I think it's obviously good that he's coming back, right? Like, I think Notre Dame would have been very out of pocket and in a very bad spot had he not, given the timing of everything. I thought like many people, I thought the wording of the announcement was curious. I don't know that it means anything per se. I don't want to read too much into it. It's just like a snap judgment on my part where he says he's running it back in 2026. Like I said on Hit and Hustle, like I thought that was something that like a Don Schuler would write or something that Drake Bowen would write, like one more run at it for your, last year of eligibility or whatever it might be. But then it's kind of with the context of, we felt like, and when I say we, I mean the Notre Dame fan base and people who cover the program, like it was this big decision or this big thing. And I don't know that Marcus Freeman felt that way. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty of like how serious all of this was with the NFL. And Jamie and I talked about it on the show. It was kind of a perfect storm of Notre Dame not making the playoffs and then not participating in a bowl game where they had nothing to do. They weren't practicing. They weren't, they weren't doing anything as a team. They had a bowling event, which was, a couple days after the bowl announcement.
Marcus Freeman got to spend a lot of time in New York.
Yeah, he was in New York all the time. Like so I think if there's anything we know about Marcus Freeman is he's not going to just sit around, right? So if he used the opportunity to put out feelers to the NFL, like what is my stock here? How do people feel about me? What are things that they're looking from me for my career? He's going to spend that time, for him in a wise way or whatever it might be. I don't know how serious it was ultimately. Obviously there's multiple kind of sides to that, but obviously it's a great thing for Notre Dame. They should have a very good team next year. The schedule sets up for them to make a serious run. Will Notre Dame be in this position next year with Marcus Freeman in the NFL? I mean, if the season goes the way we think it probably should, they probably will be in this position again. So, but that's a conversation for another time. I think it's good for the program, obviously, that he's coming back.
Well, if things go as planned in 2026, they shouldn't be sitting around this time of year. Right. So I don't think Marcus Freeman is going to be entertaining offers while Notre Dame is in the midst of a playoff run. Now, obviously, NFL teams can afford to wait until, however long Notre Dame plays. But as for the announcement, I think two things are true here. One, I do believe that there was legitimate interest, specifically from the New York Giants, and I think Marcus Freeman was happy to hear them out and at least seriously considered their offer. But Marcus is not really a guy who wants to make these grand statements, make it all about him. So he probably didn't want to say anything, but his team, the people around him were like, no, man, this has reached a point where you have to say something. But considering last year, at this same time, basically, they had that big announcement about the extension. He had that long statement. Pete Bavacqua had that statement. He's like, look, we probably don't need to do that again because we just did it a year ago. And like you said, we might be doing this again. So he opted with the tweet that, unfortunately for him, is going to force him to have some uncomfortable conversations with families of recruits, the recruits specifically, coaches, players in the transfer portal, because now everyone is going to be asking him, hey, are you going to be around after 2026?
Right. I think it's interesting too. I was thinking about this as well. I remember last year at this time, not literally this time because Notre Dame was in the playoffs and, making a run to the national title game. But there was a lot of interest around Mike Mickens and the idea that Mike Mickens was going to move on. If you go back and look at his Instagram post, it was literally very similar to Marcus Freeman's, which was just like, let's run it back or something to that effect. It was very just like short and to the point. And so I think people are at that point, we're like feeling like this would be Mike Mickens' last year. And people were concerned about the recruiting. They just had maybe one of the best DB hauls since like the early 90s. So it didn't affect that. Right. So I think there's ways around these things. And I do think, Mike Mickens and Marcus Freeman are very close friends, like best friends. And so it makes sense that they would have a kind of a similar announcement. They're not really ones for social media. Marcus Freeman is certainly not a social media guy in the way that someone like Lane Kiffin is. So
I don't know if anyone is.
So yeah, like there's the spectrum, right? There's Lane Kiffin over here and there's Marcus Freeman over here. So, it could be nothing, right? And it'll be interesting to hear at some point, he's going to have to talk to the media and he's going to have to answer these questions. It'll be interesting to hear how he comes up with a response to that sort of thing.
The way this all went down does change the dynamic between the fan base and him, because last year, people would have worshiped the ground that he walked on. And now there is a different feel around the entire situation, knowing that, the NFL interest is real and we're probably going to be having to deal with this every single offseason. Maybe Marcus won't entertain the interest in the same way, but like every single time a job opening comes up in college or the NFL, Marcus Freeman is going to be on the short list. There is nothing that anyone can do to change it. Look at Dan Lanning, for example. He's been pretty emphatic about the point where he doesn't want to move again. His family's had to move around a bunch of times. He's happy at Oregon. He is not going to leave. And yet every time a job comes up, like look at Michigan, for example, who was on the top of the list, Dan Lanning. So even if Marcus Freeman were coming out saying, I'm staying at Notre Dame forever, we would still have to deal with this situation. But compared to the start of last offseason, when I believe that was the first time we actually heard Marcus Freeman's name come up with an NFL job, because there was at least some level of interest from the Bear side in Marcus Freeman. That was a surprise to me. But now, after the way that this has played out, how does the overall feel of Marcus Freeman's tenure change after the way that this past month played out?
I do agree. It does feel different because he's just so. Because of the nature of the way the season ended, Notre Dame fans, we haven't heard from him, so it's like, we don't know how, like I think I was talking to you about this offline. Like we don't actually know how he feels about the team opting out of the bowl game. He has not spoken. We do not know how he took that in. We do know that he does not like it when players opt out of bowl games. That is met with a lot of, unhappiness on his part. So for the team to say we're not going to play, that seems like something that he would not like. Now, I don't have intel on that. I've kind of asked around on that. No one really kind of knows. It's not that it's super important, but the fact is we haven't heard from him. And then he's talking about the NFL. And I think the impression is like, man, this went for a long time, maybe a little bit longer than it needed to. And so people start to get critical about these things, and you start to look at him in a way that's like, maybe he's not as bought into Notre Dame as he's kind of postured before. Now, I think personally, I think the next time he speaks, he will ingratiate himself to the fans and everyone involved very well, because that's usually how it works. There's just a vacuum of information right now about him. And I think and we can we'll probably get into this a little bit later with the portal, but like, I think that right now there's only kind of bad news with respect to the program. We only hear about the players entering the portal. I get questions all the time, and I'm sure you do, about who is Notre Dame after in the portal. Like, we don't have that information because the portal hasn't really opened yet. So you only hear about players leaving. You don't hear about any coming in. And then you don't hear from Marcus Freeman. Like last year, we didn't hear from Marcus Freeman until the opening of spring ball. So there's just such a glut of, a void of information coming from Notre Dame, and none of it, everything you get is bad news. So I think it's all kind of a perfect storm of, like, the vibes aren't very good right now. But once they start to get some portal acquisitions, once we hear from Marcus Freeman, then I think things will turn around.
Without a doubt. It was the same way last year. I mean, the day after Notre Dame lost to Ohio State, the bad news started flowing in, at least on the rumor mill. You're hearing, this guy's going to leave, this guy's going pro, this coach is gone, all of that. And then as time goes by, it's usually never as bad as it seems. And some of the things I heard the past few weeks, like, I'm gonna bring this up. As recently as a few days ago, when I think there was a pretty good understanding that Marcus Freeman had signed and an announcement was imminent, I heard someone sent me, they're like, hey, can you verify this? And it was, Marcus is gone, and there are two key players on the roster that you could probably figure out. Two of the very top players of the team are in negotiations with Miami, and everything is already over and done with. And then the very next day, Marcus Freeman announces he's coming back. And we already knew that those players had already re-signed with Notre Dame. So not only are you only getting bad news, the whispers and things like that are also bad and usually not even close to the truth.
Yeah, people, it's a weird time because, we kind of hear things on background, and like, these are all things that like aren't really reportable, but you hear about them. And so you just kind of like, you get a general sense of things. And then people will like send me messages like similar to you. And it's like, hey, what about this? Or are you worried about this? And I'm like, I don't, where is this coming from? I don't know where you're getting this. But it obviously exists somewhere. And so it's just Notre Dame, like there needs to be a shift in the news that comes in. And once the portal opens and players start to kind of, we learn who Notre Dame's targets are and how they fill out the roster. I mean, people are in like genuine panic mode about the defensive line right now because Donovan Heinrich retired. Obviously, Gabe Rubio's gone. Josh Burnham just entered the portal, which was kind of known. So for me, it's not a big deal because we kind of knew this. And so, Billy Schrauth goes to pro. Like, I think we kind of hinted at that as well, that he wasn't going to be on the roster. So, but it's like when we know it, we've known it, and then the fans hear about it, and it's like, what's going on here, And so we're just kind of like, we understand this is kind of what's going to happen. But like I said, we just need to hear better news. Like they're just
right.
The cycle needs to turn over.
Greg and I still have more on Marcus Freeman's decision to turn down the NFL and return to Notre Dame, including how we think he would fare in the NFL. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about a great new offer courtesy of Locked On. If you've not already, make sure you check out our new Everydayer Club. You'll get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Irish. Same show, same schedule, just no ads. And it works on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. If you listen every day, it's a really easy upgrade. Go to lockedonirish.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the game tips off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. When you open the FanDuel app during Happy Hour, it always brings something new, from boosts to bonuses and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes, and the timing is perfect, right before the games and right before the weekend starts. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour, only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. How do you think Marcus Freeman would fit as an NFL head coach if or when he makes that jump?
So it's interesting because there aren't many. So like Marcus Freeman runs the Notre Dame program as like the CEO. Obviously, he has a defensive background, right? But we never hear about him being the play caller or anything like that. We
heard fans speculated, but that was not realistic.
But that wasn't a thing, right? And we know that he kind of, I don't want to say took over the defense, post Texas A&M or halftime or Purdue or whatever. I mean, he definitely had his fingerprints on conversations that happened with the defensive staff, right? But he's not over there with a play sheet. He is never doing that sort of thing, right? And so he wants to run things as like kind of a CEO type. There aren't that many head coaches who are young in the NFL who fit that mold. I don't know that I can even really think of one. I mean, the Dan Campbell for a time, maybe, right? Like,
yeah. Who's now calling plays,
offensive plays for the Lions. I don't think that's something that Marcus Freeman won't ever have in his bag to call offensive plays for the Lions. I mean, I mean, he's not an offensive coach, but like, I don't know that he would ever like take over play calling for an NFL team. I think that he's like the most similar coach to him is Mike Tomlin at Pittsburgh, but he was also like in the NFL for a long time. He didn't just go from college to the NFL. He'd been in NFL with that organization for a period of time as well, working under Bill Cowher. So and he's been with the Steelers forever, right? So for him to be a little bit more CEO type, like that makes sense. Like John Harbaugh comes to mind a little bit at Baltimore. But then again, like he's also been in the NFL for a long time. So the type of coach that he is, I don't know that there's like, I feel like every young coach that comes into the NFL has a side of the ball that they are in control of. And I don't know that Marcus Freeman, that's going to be his thing. That's kind of why, like, if he's going to be a CEO type, I think he needs to be a little bit older. And I don't mean, he's about to turn 40. I don't mean he needs to be like 50, but like I just think he needs to be in charge of his own program for a little bit longer before he makes the jump to the NFL and then is like, oh, I'm a CEO guy who can direct all the rest of them. Like if he went to the Steelers, right? Like people are talking about the Steelers. I think Aaron Rodgers is older than he is.
He is, yeah.
So like, how does that work? Like, is Aaron Rodgers going to listen to Marcus Freeman about things? Like, I don't know that that's true. So not that he would, I don't know his situation with the Steelers, but you kind of get what I'm saying.
I think Jim Harbaugh is another good example of someone who kind of fits the mold of Freeman, because Harbaugh obviously spent a lot of time in college, but Harbaugh really started his coaching career in the NFL. He was with Western Kentucky for a little bit with his dad, but he also was the coach or the quarterback's coach of the Oakland Raiders. And then he went to college and then he went back to the NFL. So obviously Harbaugh had a ton of success, is having success in the NFL, but he played quarterback there. He had coached there before. So if Marcus Freeman were to make that jump, and that jump seems inevitable at some point, it's going to be a big learning curve for him. And I'm not going to doubt his ability to learn and adapt and evolve on the job, but I think he would struggle off the bat, especially if he went to a team like the Giants who don't have a quarterback. So ultimately, I think he made the right decision, and the fact that he decided to come back to Notre Dame is obviously the best way you can ingratiate yourself with the fan base, but I think it also represents his belief in the program still, despite the way that this past season ended.
Yeah, and I just think it's kind of a wake-up call, right? Like, the time is limited. This isn't forever. And he's been at Notre Dame for 4 years. He's coming up on 5. He's built the program up in a way that, I mean, the reason that everyone thinks that he's such a great coach is also the reason why NFL teams will be looking at him. Yeah. Because the way that he built up Notre Dame and the way that he's kind of conducted himself and comported himself, everyone likes him for these reasons, but that's also why an NFL team would be interested. Like this just comes along with it. If you're going to be a great coach, if you're going to do a very good job, that's going to get noticed, right? Like there's a reason that Brian Kelly led Notre Dame to a national title game and then got interest from the NFL. And then that never really materialized again.
He was calling them.
Exactly. Because it never materialized again because he wasn't performing well enough to kind of reach that level again. So it's a give and take there.
So Freeman's uncertain future and the expectations for this team make for a really unique offseason because it's obviously exciting, but all the pressure can be overwhelming, as we saw with what happened to Penn State this past year. So how would you describe your emotions going into the offseason now that the biggest hurdle is over with, but also knowing just how much pressure is on this team heading into 2026?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's hard to gauge expectations because we haven't seen how the roster is filling out, right? They have some issues depth-wise with defensive tackle. They need to bring in a top line wide receiver. We need to see what offensive line is going to look like. We know the secondary is going to be good. We know linebackers are going to be good. I think we know the defense as a whole will be good. I think they'll find bodies to where it's like, okay, they're good enough on the interior, whereas like you got to feel good about Boubacar Traore. You got to feel good about Bryce Young. If Jalen Sneed is coming back, like there's a piece there that can come off the edge. So I feel like pass rush and linebacker in the secondary is going to be very good. Obviously, you feel great about CJ Carr. What kind of running game are they going to have? Who are they going to bring in a wide receiver? And it's like, I know there was pressure on Penn State, but that I think people kind of realized like that team was a little bit overrated as well, So Notre Dame's schedule sets up to where it's like they also shouldn't really run into what Penn State did, It's just like the quality of team that Notre Dame has been the last 2 years. You can project that forward and say, okay, they were top 5 F+ last year, top 5 F+ this year. You feel like that's going to continue. For me, the expectations, they're high like Penn State, but there's also sometimes there's high expectations on teams like, Ohio State or Georgia, and they are able to year over year be contenders for, the playoffs and national titles. I think that's where Notre Dame needs to get, right? Like they lost 2 games in 2025. They really should not in 2026. I mean, this is like one loss is max. They really need to be thinking about going undefeated because that's what's out there for them.
Coming up, Greg and I are going to do a deep dive into the end of the Notre Dame-USC rivalry. Greg is born and raised in Southern California, so this hits especially close to him. But first, a word from Gametime. There's nothing like college football season, tailgates, packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, and prices jumping at checkout. That's why Gametime gives the advantage back to fans. It is the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. The app is incredibly easy to use. I went from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. I loved being able to see the view from my seat before buying, so I knew exactly what I was getting. The zone deal stood out. You pick the section, Gametime picks the seats, and you save even more. Knowing prices include all fees up front makes the whole process stress-free. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Let's shift gears now and talk about the official end of the Notre Dame-USC rivalry. You and I have talked about this at length on this show when we knew it was a possibility, but neither of us really thought it would become a reality, and yet here we are. I am disappointed, I'm frustrated, and I'm honestly a little bit confused by how everything fell apart the way that it did. So what is your perspective on it now that it's official?
My perspective is it sucks and it's unsurprising because this didn't come up out of nowhere. And Lincoln Riley did not bring this up out of nowhere 2 years ago because this is the outcome that he wanted. And I think we heard all during the year, all during the fall, there was optimism from both sides that they were going to get it worked out. And we'd even heard Notre Dame knew. We heard Notre Dame knew that they had to move the game. They had to play earlier in the year. They had to play in September. And Notre Dame was resigned to that.
In 2027.
In 2027, 2026, like it could not, the current format was not going to work. And Notre Dame knew, and they were going to work it out. And there was optimism there.
Apparently they did work it out.
And apparently they did. And then they didn't, right? Because of this MOU, new information. Like, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. And it was reported out as ridiculous. They didn't want to play the game. Lincoln Riley specifically didn't want to play the game. And so it went away. And so on that front, I've kind of been of the opinion that, you know what, if USC doesn't want it, USC is on a different path right now than they've always been on. And I think this is what you hear from like Petros Papadakis and Keyshawn Johnson and Carson Palmer and other alumni. Like, this is not the USC that they've been for pretty much their entire existence. So if USC is going through something right now, then let them go through it. At some point, Lincoln Riley will leave and Jen Cohen will leave. And honestly, I'll bet you it has nothing to do with Jen Cohen. I'll bet you once Lincoln Riley leaves, Pete Bavacqua can get on the phone with Jen Cohen and be like, all right, let's figure this out. And then it'll get figured out. Like, to me, this is a break. They're on a break. It'll get revisited once Lincoln Riley leaves the program.
Totally agree with you. Although Lincoln Riley did say on, Tuesday night after the Alamo Bowl, the window is open, Greg. It took 4 years, but now the window is open at USC, according to Lincoln Riley. He said this, of course, after they lost to TCU's backup quarterback in a bowl game, one in which TCU scored a game-winning touchdown on a check-down pass in 3rd and 20, but now the window is open.
Things are trending up. The arrow is pointed up. What is shocking. We were talking about it before that we started recording here. A shocking press conference from Lincoln Riley. I can't even imagine what people would be saying if this was like a Marcus Freeman thing. After 4 years, when your main rival has been to a national title game and has beaten you 3 of the last 3 years in a row. You obviously have Indiana with Curt Cignetti, who went to the playoffs in his first year at Indiana and now is the number 1 seed in the playoffs and went undefeated in the regular season. And he's talking about 4 years. And now the window is open. It's incredible. What an incredible thing to say. That's all I could put it on Twitter is like incredible, because an amazing thing for him to say after losing to TCU's backup quarterback.
Especially when Indiana is going to play in USC's backyard tomorrow in the Rose Bowl. And it took Curt Cignetti 2 years to turn Indiana into a legitimate national championship contender, but it took Lincoln Riley 4 years to even open the window. But I agree with you. I do think it's going to come back, and I think it's going to come back fairly soon. When Notre Dame and USC were working on that short-term deal, and I had heard that it was a done deal, that an announcement was imminent. I was wondering why it hadn't happened yet. I thought it might happen going into the game between Notre Dame and USC, but then that didn't happen. I was like, okay, that's a little bit peculiar, but it sounded like Notre Dame was still moving some things around so that they could play it earlier in the year like USC wanted. But it's all setting up for whoever replaces Lincoln, and I think that's going to happen within the next 2 years. I think USC is going to go 8-4 next year. They have a pretty difficult schedule, even without Notre Dame, and I think he's either going to be gone after next year or the year after that. And then whoever follows him, it is such a layup at the opening press conference to be like, we're bringing back the Notre Dame game. We're going to let former players come back to campus. We're going to try to bring USC back to the old days.
We're going to open practice again.
Right. It's going to be like in politics where when someone is elected and they just say they're going to get rid of all the previous administration's policies, it doesn't even matter which party. It's just all part of the plan. And it seems like it's all set up. But it felt like to me that the short-term deal was basically a buffer for when Lincoln would leave, and then they could set up the long-term deal after that. So I do think it's going to happen. It's really disappointing that it's going on a hiatus, but I do believe that within the next 5 years, Notre Dame and USC are going to play each other again in the regular season.
Yeah, it'll get worked out. There's one impediment to it, and it is the man opening windows.
The thing that is just so mind-boggling to me, and I understand that fans are going to defend their team, but USC fans were so quick to run Clay Helton out of town. And for good reason. He wasn't performing. But you look at pretty much any stat, the Lincoln Riley era is going about the same as Clay Helton, with the exception of that 2022 season when it seems like they captured lightning in a bottle. They had the best quarterback in college football. He won the Heisman, but they didn't even win the Pac-12. That's the only good season he's had. And then they go over to the Big Ten to what? Bring in more television money and then go 7-5 or 8-4 every year. And yet it still feels like a large portion of the fan base will go to bat for Lincoln. Although I will say last night after the Alamo Bowl, some of the loudest Lincoln Riley defenders did have to admit that was a tough look for them.
I mean, it's one of those things where you get snapped back into reality. I mean, it's kind of like what we're talking about with Marcus Freeman, right? Where we haven't heard from him, and so therefore your mind kind of gets away from, and we haven't heard from him, and we haven't seen his team play. So your mind kind of gets away from things. And I think USC is in a similar boat where, the last time we saw them, they had, they beat UCLA. They're on some, big, whatever, pouting their chest, doing their PR stuff. And you think, USC's kind of puffing their chest a little bit and they're different than the program that they've been. And then you actually see them play. And I think that's what's going on with some of their fans. It's like, oh my God, like, it's all just a show. Like, it's all just a facade. Like, they're just talking and they're not actually, there's nothing there. The emperor has no clothes kind of thing. And so it is what it is. Like, and some of the alumni have been pointing to this, like, this is not the USC that we know. And, that's how it's going to be for as long as he's there, unfortunately for them.
If I were to give USC any credit, I do think they outsmarted Notre Dame from a PR perspective down the stretch. I think the moment that Marcus Freeman said we'll play him anytime, anywhere, the plan started to be put in place. And they realized that it was no longer about actually coming to an agreement with Notre Dame about when they would play. It was about coming out of that as the quote-unquote winners of the press conference, because Notre Dame had been very aggressive saying they wanted to play the series. There were leaks to Pat Forty, there were leaks to Ross Sellinger, where Pete Bavacqua and Marcus Freeman were coming out saying, we're going to do whatever it takes to play this game. So then USC lets Notre Dame move their whole schedule around and force their hand, and Notre Dame was willing to do it to accommodate USC's wishes in order to play earlier in the season. And then at the last second, I think you and I both have heard that USC just as recently as a few weeks ago, went back to Notre Dame and said, hey, we're only playing week 0. Make it work. And at that point, Notre Dame was probably so fed up in dealing with someone who clearly was not operating in good faith and did not actually want to play that game. So they were like, screw it. We're going to go play someone else who actually wants to make this game happen. They set up the BYU arrangement in allegedly a matter of minutes. But then USC gets to say, well, hey, we proposed a way for us to play Notre Dame, and they were the ones who opted out. And then Lincoln Riley gets to go in his press conference, puff out his chest saying that, hey, Notre Dame said they wanted to play anytime, anywhere. Now they're the ones opting out. So from that standpoint, they did get a win. And honestly, by the way that some USC fans are reacting in the moment, you would think that they had won on the field, which, they haven't done in a real long time.
Right. And then they had a chance to see them play. And I was like, oh, right. Like, it's
same old,
not a good football team. I mean, it is true. Like, I do agree with you. But I think the difference is like for Notre Dame, why not week 0? Why not ever? When you're the athletic director, not just at Notre Dame, but anywhere, and a team and your rival like USC comes to you in your opinion, good faith, and says, hey, we need to move the game around. And then you go and do that. That's not easy. It's not something you could just snap your fingers and do. You got to call a whole bunch of other schools. You got to
who you just talked to, by the way.
Right.
You just worked to create a new agreement with those same schools, and now you have to go back to them and say, hey, we actually have to change things around to accommodate USC.
Right. And then USC comes back and says, actually, all that's for nothing. You are going to do it's week 0 or nothing. Well, at some point, it's like, well, no, I'm a serious person in a serious job and doing serious thing. I'm not just going to do all this work for you, because then it's not like you could just play week 0. There's a whole, like you said, you got to get a waiver. Or where are we playing? Right. What is going on here?
Yeah. Brazil is a place that USC threw out there. Like, are you serious?
Yeah. So at some point it becomes a non-starter. At some point they're acting in bad faith. We're just going to move on with our lives. And that's what Notre Dame decided to do. And I understand that. But like you said, USC played the PR thing of anytime, anywhere, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, it's not a good program. They're kind of swimming and lost right now, and Notre Dame's in a much better spot.
Now that the USC rivalry is on hiatus, Notre Dame doesn't really have any true rivals left unless you count Navy, which I don't. Then you factor in the way that the season ended with the Irish being snubbed from the playoff. Have you become more open to Notre Dame joining a conference? Not necessarily what you think will happen, but what you think should happen, or maybe you're just more open to the idea than you were before?
I'm definitely more open just because it seems like there's a push from college football at large, at least in the media. I don't know how serious. Like, it's hard because BYU was kind of like very vocal against Notre Dame, and then they go and schedule them right on a home and home, like very short notice. So it's like people are just kind of. It's like I liken Steve Sarkisian saying things like, "Oh, we shouldn't schedule these teams." I liken that to me kind of threatening my kids with like no TV and no this, that, and the other thing if you're not going to like do your homework or whatever. Like some of these are just kind of empty threats. And I think that a lot of that is going on. But college football is moving in a direction where Notre Dame, it's possible Notre Dame could be forced. And if that happens, then it happens. You do what you have to do. I think after this year, Notre Dame gets, they get Auburn on the schedule. They get Texas on the schedule. Like they start to get some of these better teams. And it's like the schedule didn't work out next year, but going forward, it'll get a lot better to where it's like, okay, there's some real tests on this schedule. And, so I don't have I know 26 doesn't look good, but going forward, I think people will be okay with it. I also think like, that's why I'm kind of like, hey, Notre Dame dropped 2 games in 25. That simply cannot happen again. They're too good for that.
Agree.
And so it like that needs to be the focus. Like get this losing stuff out of the way. Like stop doing that. Beat the teams you should, and be a dominant team, right? I mean, because you look at like Indiana's schedule, you look at Ohio State's schedule. They didn't have that many teams that were like true threats to them, but the times that they did play, they won the games. That's what Notre Dame needs to do.
I totally agree. The schedule for 2026 is not great, to say the least. It gets a little bit better in 2027. They play Auburn at home, and they go on the road at Clemson, although who knows what Clemson is going to look like in 2027. That's actually the start of that new deal there. And then 2028, that's when you get Texas at home, on the road against James Franklin of Virginia Tech, assuming he's still there, at Auburn, Miami at home. So the schedule does get better, but I do think it's worth exploring this offseason. If you're Pete Bavacqua or you're anyone in the Notre Dame administration, what is the value of being independent in this era of Notre Dame football? Because you don't have USC anymore. You already have your 5 games given to you by the ACC, and those games clearly have not been up to snuff. So I think they're going to have some difficult conversations about what the value is before, because yes, they have a TV deal with NBC, but they're probably not making as much money. I think the biggest issue for me is I'm way more open to Notre Dame joining a conference. I do not hold the independent status in such high regard, certainly not as high as I used to, because I want to see Notre Dame play more competitive games. But on the flip side of that, which conference would they join? Because the SEC is not going to happen. They might set up some scheduling agreement, but you will never see Notre Dame men's or women's basketball playing in the SEC. Big 12 is not going to happen. It seems like the relationship with the ACC is fractured, and it's not like Notre Dame and the Big Ten have a great history between each other. And I don't really want Notre Dame to go to a conference that is now dealing with the private equity stuff and everything like that. So it's like, okay, yeah, sure. You want Notre Dame to join a conference? Okay. Tell me which one is a good partnership for them. And I don't really have an answer.
Yeah. I think there's something with the SEC though, because Pete Bavacqua likes to go out of his way and talk about how he and Greg Sankey are always talking.
Yeah, those two and Trump that hitting the golf course.
I was about to say, like he went golfing with President Trump, and then he went, he mentioned I think it was one of the shows where he called Greg Sankey after the committee met or made their decision or whatever. He was on the phone with Greg Sankey, like clearly signaling, he's not talking about the Big Ten commissioner. He's talking about the SECs. He has a relationship there. And I think that's something where for the SEC, it's like, you don't have to join our conference, but don't join the Big Ten, So I think the SEC will accommodate them in some kind of way. I think he'll make sure that happens.
All right, Greg, this has been great as always. Make sure you check out Greg's podcast, Hit and Hustle, with another friend of the program, Jamie Uyeyama. It is one of my personal favorites, and we always appreciate your time. So thanks again, man. Be well, and I hope you and the family have a happy new year.
Yes, sir. You too.
All right, that is going to do it for today's episode, and that's a wrap on 2025 here on Locked On Irish. Thank you for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen each and every day. And if you've been enjoying the show, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow the show on your favorite podcast platform, like the video, and leave a rate and review. It really helps us grow. I'm headed to the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day. It's going to be tough watching two teams knowing that it should be Notre Dame there, but I'm going to get through it. So we will not have a new episode out on Friday, but then I will be back maybe as soon as this weekend reacting to the biggest news in the transfer portal. Happy New Year, everybody. Enjoy the games and go Irish.